Today on Anatomy of Speed, my absolute favourite, a Datsun 1600. But not just any Datsun. This one belongs to Jake. He won the 2020 Clubman Rally Championship in this beast of a 1600. Well, there we have it. The best car of all time. A 1968 Datsun 1600, or for you Americans, a P510. All right, well, it might not be the best car ever made, but to me, it is, because a 1968 Datsun 1600 was one of my very first cars. I learned to drive in one of these. Used to take all my friends and we'd pile into these and go to McDonald's and hang out, or go down to Cronulla Beach in Sydney and just drive up and down showing off our Datsuns. It was the first car that I did an engine conversion in. I bought one of these that had a L18 1.8 litre on LPG, so it actually had a gas tank in the back. It was really weird. That was one of the first conversions I did, where I put a Nissan CA18 turbocharged engine in it out of a Nissan 180SX. That was actually my start into Haltech as well, incredibly, where I put that engine in the car and then didn't realise you needed a computer to control it. I was about 16 or 17, and I actually went to Haltech, which were in Tarrant Point at the time, near Cronulla where I grew up, and said, listen, this is what I've done. And then I ended up buying an E6K, I think it was, so very, very early Haltech engine management system, wired it up, got it tuned, got it running, and that was it. So that was my first sort of venture into Datsuns, and sort of got me to where I am today. Now, when I got my first Datsun, it was around 30 years old. Now, these things are around 50 years old. They're even more popular than they were then, and they're being turned into race cars every single day. Now, there's got to be something amazing about these cars, and there is. They were one of the very first cars in the world to have an independent rear suspension setup, and just have a look at it. Don't you think that's one of the nicest looking cars just ever made? Now, Jake and his family run the Datsun as a classic rally car. And in classic rally cars, you might remember Bruce's Mark I Escort that we did a feature on not so long ago. Now, that wasn't such a classic, well, the body was classic, but remember that that had the Honda K24A3 engine in it, not the Datsun.
So this car we've owned for 5 years. I've bought into it with my dad, so he owned it, and I've saved my money so I could now half own the car. And we've gone through a fair few cars now where we're slowly getting better, more technology, getting a bit faster, and we want to keep moving on with the times. We bought it because it was such a good start. Or someone had it on a spit for probably, it looked like a couple of years. Everything had been seam welded, the cage is nice in it, and it was a really good starting point to where the car can be developed. So our goals were to make this car into a better rally car. It was bigger suspension, bigger engine, more safety, so when we crash, we're safe. The bigger brakes, that sort of stuff, all the basics you need to turn it into a proper rally car.
The almighty L series. It's powered plenty of rally cars in its day. There's still an excellent engine. Single overhead cam, they've got a timing chain down the front. This started as a 1.6 litre in this car, but there were the L18 1.8 litre, the L20, and then L24 as well. So this engine has been around for a long time. There's been plenty of support, plenty of development. They do make great power. So if you do have a 1600, if you have got a classic rally car, don't rip this thing out and just throw it in the bin to put something new and high-tech in, because the case often is the case that you don't need to. These things make great power, they make great torque, and they sound amazing.
a gravel rally car. We go for the two-wheel drive sort of aspect of it. It is a classic, so we can compete in that class as well, but we want to go for the two-wheel drive. We want to be the fastest two-wheel drive car on the gravel. So we wanted to compete in the two-wheel drive class because we can prove that we can beat the more modern, the more expensive cars in an old Datsun. The reality of beating someone with a 43-year-old motor when they've got their SR20 turbos, it makes it a very rewarding experience.
One of the reasons you would do an engine conversion on another particular car is maybe that you simply can't get parts for them anymore, whereas this is not the case. On this thing, full gasket sets, rods, pistons, crankshafts, you name it, water pumps, you can get them. So when you are in the middle of nowhere, when you tell someone you've got an L series, you still will be able to get parts for it and repair it. And that's really, really important when you're running a rally car. This particular 1968 model 1600 would have started life with a pretty asthmatic 60-ish horsepower L16, 1.6 litre engine. This thing has got, well, now a 2.4 litre L series. It's pushing nearly 160 horsepower at the wheels, and with these trumpets on the side would sound a whole lot different. The engine's been prepared by Jake's dad, Michael, and he just freshened this thing up over the Christmas holidays. So in here, it's got a Nissan Navara 2.4 litre crankshaft. It's got the L20 rods. It's got some oversized pistons, making it a 2.4 litre engine. In the intake system for this engine, we've got an EFI hardware throttle body setup. It's got 50mm intake throttle for each individual cylinder. It's got fuel injection, obviously, that's why we're here. The air goes into the cylinder head. Then we've got a work style camshaft up the top that helps the engine breathe. Then the exhaust doesn't come out over that side. The exhaust comes back out over this side. So a non-cross-flow style cylinder head, meaning the air goes in through 4 ports up the top, then 4 ports just to the side come back out. The exhaust and intake are both on the same side here. It's got a tuned length exhaust manifold through the exhaust and out the back. When Michael converted the L series over to the electronic fuel injection, there was a pretty big challenge. Being a carbureted engine to start with, there was no engine position sensor or no cam reference signal. So he's done something really clever here. So he's pulled out the factory distributor and he sort of retrofitted a bunch of parts, including a Mitsubishi Magna sort of distributor shaft, made it up to the top with a Nissan Pulsar GTI-R crank angle sensor. And he's done that because he's had access to all of those parts, and they actually rally a GTI-R Pulsar as well. So having access to all of those bits and pieces, it makes sense to use the parts that you've got so that you only need to carry 1 spare of each. Over the other side, you can definitely tell they're a rally family. They've done an individual coil kit, but normally we see the Nissan R35 coil or the Yaris coil or an IGN 1A coil, or all of those different styles. They've opted for the Subaru coil. Rally guys, they've got Subaru parts. So they've put 4 of the Subaru coils. They've still got a built-in ignition module. They still make really good spark energy. Got a nice bracket so they sit over the top. Don't have any spark plug leads to fall off. Again, being a rally car, the most important thing is being reliable, and having a coil setup like that is absolutely perfect. One of the biggest dangers to any rally car is engine temperature. These guys have fitted an absolutely huge aluminium radiator up the front here. It's got heaps of volume. It's got a recovery tank on the side. These engines see some serious RPM for prolonged time, so we need to make sure that we keep these engines cool, because in a rally stage, you don't know how much dirt's going to come through the front, how much mud's going to come in. If you block off half of this radiator, with any luck, this thing will still finish the stage. And like the motorsport saying goes, to finish first, you must first finish.
Dad is the main reason why I'm in rallying. If it wasn't for my family being in rallying, I definitely wouldn't be here. It's such a family-based sport. You just can't do it without them. First time I would have noticed and started sort of growing a personality, and that sort of been 12, 13 years old when Dad's put a video camera on us. We did a lot of footage, filming, that sort of thing. And standing in the forest 6-7 hours watching rally cars drive past and being like, I want to do this.
Because this is a competitive rally car, chassis strengthening is an absolute must. You don't want to get halfway through a stage and start noticing that your window's falling out or the chassis is starting to get cracks through bits and pieces or it's starting to get weird rattles. So this car has been fully seam welded. That means that every single panel on this car that used to have just tiny little spot welds to hold everything together has now been fully stitched and seam welded. It's got the strut brace across the top to hold these strut towers in place once you're coming over a crest, or whether you're jumping it or whether you're hitting huge potholes or whether you're occasionally coming off the track. And of course, it's got the beautiful MCA suspension with the remote reservoirs up here in order to help sort of manage that shock as that shock absorber is getting pressed so hard as you're smashing those potholes. So having the MCAs in it, I'm sure makes the ride a whole lot nicer and helps the driver to get that sort of that control as wheels are starting to lift on and off the tarmac. And lastly, in the engine bay, we've got our Datsun 180B brake booster coming up to our Nissan Patrol 1-inch master cylinder up here for the brakes. Remembering the Nissan-Datsun relationship, so many of the parts are interchangeable, and that's what makes the Datsun so much fun to work with. When you need a master cylinder that's got a bigger diameter because you're running bigger calipers, just look for the Nissans. You'll find one, it'll fit, everything will just work. The front of the master cylinder is pushing towards Nissan Z32 4-piston calipers. The rear of this is going to the rear of the car, obviously to the rear brakes, which happen to be Mazda 4-piston calipers. What's up with that?
We've done a fair few rallies in this car and previous cars in the last 10 years I've been driving rally cars. National Capital Rally in Canberra is one of the biggest rounds, a lot of publicity, that sort of thing. Rally of Orange, Bega would probably be the highlight, some of the best roads in New South Wales. It may be the best rally that we've done, but it's also the only time I've ever put a car off into a farmer's property through a fence. I was borrowing the car from Dad. He let me have the car for an event, and we ended up 2 kilometres into the very first stage of the rally. We decided there was a very fast right-hander over a crest, and halfway through it went to tarmac. I had as much opposite lock on as I could give it, and it's gripped up on the tarmac, and we've shot off in through this farmer's property, down through the fence, and it wasn't a good time. I've looked at Nick, who was sitting next to me. We had to figure out how we're going to get back on the road. I've jumped out of the car, which is a weird thing for a driver to do. Usually you send the navigator to do that sort of stuff, open a farmer's property fence and get back on the road and keep going. We were lucky that we didn't hit anything. It was just probably a 2-metre drop into this property. So I felt sorry for Nick, who was sitting next to me. It was the first time I've asked him along because I needed a navigator for the event. Within a K and a half of the first stage and going through a fence, it's never a good start for such a big rally. We didn't touch anything for the rest of the rally, but he hasn't been back since.
Well, let's check what's in the boot. We've got these super tight rubber straps here that hold the boot lid down, and if they're not super tight, you'll end up halfway through a stage and the boot lid will be flapping around. In the boot here, the factory fuel tank's been replaced with a tank that isn't too dissimilar to what factory is, but this one is all aluminium, it's baffled inside, holds a little bit more volume. Even though this thing is so good on fuel, the guys are telling me that they're only using about half a tank of fuel for a 50 or 60 kilometre stage or full event. So that's amazing fuel economy. So you can choose to fill it up less, carry less weight through the stage if you need that competitive advantage. On the left here, we've got a fuel sender that goes to a gauge at the front of the car. On the right, we've got this drop-in hat that then has got the baffled fuel pump assembly that sits in the bottom of the tank. Now that's got 2 Walbro 255 fuel pumps in it. You might be thinking, why does it need 2 pumps? Well, it's a rally car and these guys are prepared for anything. So it's actually got some switches up the front there where the engine management system is turning the fuel pumps on and off when the car starts and when the car runs. But if they have a fuel pressure problem, if they have a flow problem, they've got a crossover switch at the front so they can swap from one pump to the other pump. Then that'll help get out of trouble if they end up having a pump failure problem. Once the pumps have pulled that premium 98 octane petrol style fuel up out of the tank, it pushes it through the fuel lines, which are normally a rubber tube or a Bundy tube that are normally routed along the chassis rails under the car. In this case, being a rally car with the kind of environment under the car, with the rocks that are flicking up, with all of the stuff that they're hitting, this is going through stainless tube that actually runs through the cabin of the car. It doesn't go underneath anymore. So these guys have put that through the front, then it makes its way up to the engine, feeds the engine, then we've got a return fuel line after the fuel pressure regulator that comes back and returns back into the tank. Over this side, we've got our regular battery system, so just keeping that battery in the boot of the car so it's not up the front cluttering up the engine bay. We've got our spare wheel, which is really important for a rally car, and like we saw on Bruce's Escort as well, these guys know where it's at. So they've got the jack over here, and then in this bucket on this side, I'll crack this open. They've got their battery-powered rattle gun so that if it does have a flat in the middle of a stage, nice and easy, pull the rattle gun out, pull the spare out. That rattle gun's got the right end on it so that it'll push the jack up, pull the wheel off, put a new one on, and you're away. Nice and quick and nice and easy. On these wheels, if they look super familiar, it's because they probably are. They're from an R30 Skyline, and we were just talking about this before, but they're quite nice looking wheels. They fit the era of the car, but more importantly, this is a factory wheel off a factory car that cops all this crazy abuse that this car goes through. It's a real testament to how these wheels were made back in the day. A testament to the reliability and the build strength of this Datsun is that every race that it's ever been entered in, it's finished. And that's a big deal for a rally car where absolutely anything can go wrong, but these guys are so prepared, the car's so well built that it's finished every race. Amazing. Mated to the L series in the front, we've got a Datsun 240K 5-speed gearbox. It's had 3 of the gears upgraded with some Hollinger gears so the guys get the right gear ratios to suit the torque that this engine's making. Power is transferred from the gearbox down to the R180 diff. It's got a 4/8 gear ratio in it. Now, interestingly, that rear diff that's in this car came out of a Datsun 720 Ute. In the 720 Ute, that was actually used as the front diff. Talk about that for parts interchange. In the Datsuns I used to play with, I used to have a huge amount of problems getting that power from the diff to the wheels. And that's because these cars typically had a universal joint or a half shaft style system where they had a universal joint at both ends of the shaft. The guys have come up with a really nice solution in this particular car. They're using shortened CV joints out of an R30 Skyline. Nice and simple, nice and reliable. Again, parts that you can find out of other donor cars. I know we've talked about reliability so much in these rally cars, and that's because Michael and Jake have got experience with these rally cars. They know all of the things that can go wrong, and that's why they've employed a Haltech engine management system to be looking over the engine. This car is fitted with the Elite 550 series ECU. It's got air temperature, it's got coolant temperature, it's got throttle position, it's got oil pressure, and it's got fuel pressure sensors, as well as a wideband oxygen sensor. All that information being fed into the engine management system to do tuning, first of all, to do data logging, and in Michael and Jake's case, to do the engine protection strategy. So once all that information comes into the engine management system, it's spat out via the CAN network to the IQ3 street dash here. So the guys can see all of the information there. We've got warning lights that come up. We've got our shift lights that come up, and we can see straight away if something goes wrong. But if I was driving 150 horsepower of Datsun 1600 over the dirt, through the bush, round a blind corner and over a crest, I promise you I wouldn't be looking at the dash. So to keep this engine living, we've got an engine protection strategy that's going to rev limit the engine and reduce power if something critical happens. The driver's then got time to have a look down, look at the dash, have a look at the warning lights, figure out what's going on, and decide whether they're going to push on or whether they're going to pull over and save the engine. And like I said before, these guys have prepared this car so well, they've never had to make that choice. Remembering that a car like this doesn't have side intrusion, it doesn't have any airbags, we need to make this thing as safe as possible for the driver and for the navigator or the co-pilot. That's why it's got a weld-in 6-point roll cage, it's got these beautiful Sparko winged seats, and it's got these 5-point harnesses that are all put into the seat mounts and go back to the cage at the back there. Up on the switch panels here, this is another rally style thing. So remembering that the engine management system is turning the fan on and off, the engine management system is turning the fuel pump on and off, but the rally guys want to have these override switches because if they're halfway through an event, they're pulled over on the side and they're waiting for another car to blast past in the dirt, they just want to have their switches to be able to flick things on and off to get an idea whether they've had a wiring failure or a particular component failure. So flicking things on and off nice and easy within hand's reach, nice and simple way to do it down here. We've got a battery cutoff switch, we've got the ignition isolation switch, our engine start button, we've got a mechanical oil gauge in the middle here. I know that we've got our dash here, we've got all our warnings, we've got all the stuff there, so nothing can possibly go wrong, but we've also got a mechanical gauge, just so we can see right there, both the driver and the navigator can see the oil pressure at all times and report back to each other on what they've noticed. The gauge on the right here is just a simple battery voltage display, so that might come in handy if we flick off a belt or if something somehow comes up through one of the rock guards and takes the belt off the alternator. Over to the left here, we've got the TerraTrip system. We've spoken about this before. It's a really clever thing that brings in our road speed, knows where we are, and then that'll give us the distance to each corner so that the navigator can call out to the driver exactly where things are coming up, where corners are, where jumps are, all that sort of stuff. There's a CB just sitting here as well. Hopefully we don't need to use this, but in the case of emergency, we can call race control or we can call other cars to let them know there might be something on the road or we're broken down or there might be a kangaroo crossing, something like that. The last part up here in the car is the intercom between helmets. So the guys will plug each of their helmets in so they can talk to each other and it's nice and clear because inside this thing, remember there's no noise insulation, there's no padding, there's no nothing in here. So it'll be crazy loud when you're going over the rocks. And one of the things that I do love, the roof vents. That's an air conditioning.
So if you want to get into rallying, joining your local car club, there's plenty around Sydney, anywhere local you can look up to join a car club. Coming along to things like rally school, where if you're a licensed driver, you can jump in the driver's seat and have a go and we'll instruct you to drive the rally cars if that's what you want to do and you can go from there. So if you wanted to get into competitive rallying, it's pretty much as simple as buying whatever platform you want to buy, suspension, brakes, safety gear, and you're pretty much ready to go and you can be out in the forest driving. Before I got my license, I started off in a little front-wheel drive N14 Pulsar that we put a roll cage in and then it developed from there. We put the suspension in it. We didn't spend a lot of money. It was a $1,000 car. And we were able to get out in the forest and drive, which is what we wanted to do. If you get to that point where you want to step up to start competing at the front end, it's more developing as a driver. The car maintenance, once you start pushing harder, everything's getting pushed harder, the engine, everything. And it's the dedication you need to want to work in the shed every weekend, to get the car ready, to then go out and drive it through the bush and maybe drive for 5 kilometres and something breaks. At the end of the day, really it's the desire to want to win, to compete, the love for motorsport and gravel rallying that you need to have to not turn it into a chore. You don't want to be fixing the car and not want to do it because you just won't do it. You'll sit there in the shed with a broken car and you won't be happy.
Well, now you can sort of get the idea that after we've gone through Bruce's rally car and had a look, after we've now gone through Michael and Jake's Datsun and had a bit of a look, you can tell that there's a bit of a different mindset here. And yeah, it doesn't have shiny paint. Yeah, it doesn't have huge wheels. It doesn't have drag slicks, but it's a completely different form of motorsport. We've got circuit racing, we've got drag racing, we've got street cars, we've got stereo sound off cars, we've got cars that have got beautiful interiors. Rally cars are a completely different kettle of fish. But just because they don't have all of that stuff, they don't have 1,000 horsepower engines. They've got modest engines that the driver needs to use in order to finish their events. There's a huge skill in driving one of these cars. There's a huge skill in navigating for one of these crazy drivers. And there's a huge amount of preparation that goes into these. But what's absolutely amazing about it, everyone that I run into in the rally scene, it's all a big family environment. It's often a father-son team or a full family that are in there preparing the car, getting it ready to get to these events. And then what's better than that? The whole family is at the events. They're all camping there. They make it their monthly or their yearly holiday so that everyone can go and be together and work on the cars while they're at the events. As you can probably tell, the Datsun 1600, it is my favorite car of all time. And I'm sure that when you speak to car enthusiasts all around the world, everyone's got a story about a Datsun 1600. Their dad had one, their cousin had one, somebody had one. Everyone remembers the shape. I remember driving around in mine and having, people a lot older than me, they give you the thumbs up at a set of lights, or they'd want to see you they see you in a car park and want to talk to you about the time that they had a Datsun and the way that they remembered their family and their kids in their Datsuns. So this is bringing up, a whole bunch of great stuff for me. I absolutely love the car. You never know, this might inspire me to start hunting around and looking for another Datsun 1600. Well, that's it for this episode of Anatomy of Speed. We've had a look at a couple of rally cars now. We've had a look at a couple of drag cars. Why don't you let us know in the comments what style of cars or style of racing you want us to check out next? As always, thanks so much for watching. My name's Scott, and I'll catch you next time.